First of all, I would like to thank Eugenia for her kind invitation. It's my first time here in Greece, so it's an honor, especially now in the summer. I'm very glad to be here. You really are. This presentation is titled "The International Insertion of the Chilean Left Wing During the 20th Century: Political Ideas and Networks." As in many other parts of the world, the 60s and the 70s were very significant years. Were significant years in Chile. Not only because the profound revolutionary and counter-revolutionary character of their political processes, but also because these experiences reach a universal symbolic value. Both the attempt to unite socialism and democracy during the Salvador Allende government and the authoritarian and military reaction of the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship became contradictory symbols of the possibilities and limits of political action. For many governments, political parties, and social organizations in Europe and elsewhere, the Chilean case was a moral reminder regarding the consequences of the Cold War and the East-West logic of confrontation. In that sense, Chile was viewed as a limit case of an intolerable tyranny that should be fought by forces beyond its territory through mobilization, solidarity, and collective action. This process of transformation of the Chilean case into an international symbol had much to do with the Chilean Marxist left. It was that left, organized mainly around the communists and the socialist parties, as well as other groups that create and try to apply what was known as the Chilean way to socialism. After the 1973 coup, which put an end to that experience, many of the left-wing leaders went into exile. The condition for a political reorganization in Chile became increasingly difficult as a result of the systematic attempt by the dictatorship to physically destroy the leftist parties and their social basis. Therefore, an important part of the hope of articulating a political strategy aimed to fight the regime were the exiled leaders. Taking advantage of previous contacts and networks, many of them found exile in Europe, on both sides of the Iron Curtain. The political and organizational work of these several thousand of exiles were key to the international struggle against the dictatorship, as well as for the subsequent reorganization of the left in Chile. Why this did happen? What explained that the Chilean left in exile was successful in attracting the attention of European governments and societies in favor of their cause? Why could they successfully successfully insert themselves into the society that received them, and immobilizing support and key resources for the struggle against the dictatorship. All of this was not a product of historical necessity. Chile did not have a relevant geopolitical weight for Europe in the past. In addition, unlike countries such as Argentina or Brazil, Chile was relatively untouched by European migratory flows to Latin America. Despite this relative isolation, in order to fully understand the international insertion of the Chilean left wing during the military dictatorship, it is necessary to look at its previous history. In this talk, I offer two interrelated historical explanations. One, the Chilean political culture of the 20th century aligned itself with European political debates in a greater extent than in other parts of the region. From the 1930s onwards, there was in Chile a political system composed by a conservative right, a social democrat center, and a Marxist left. They were shaped by a complex process of circulation of ideas, resources, and events, which has their base in Europe. This, of course, should not be understood only as a mechanical copy, but rather as a process of adaptation and reinterpretation of ideological principles applied to a national reality. To be sure, Chilean political conflict had to do with internal issues, such as the role of the state in society or the economic system. That conflict was signified through a number of political ideologies in dispute. For some political actors, such as the conservative right, that was an issue, inasmuch as it will prove the anti-national nature of their political rivals. Despite these controversies, many Chileans thought of themselves as part of global movements. Politics was the main nexus with which Chileans felt part of the world. And two, in this context, the left was especially skillful in developing early transnational networks. Unlike other parts of the region, the Marxist Party took over the political space available for the left from the first decade of the 20th century. Its explicit internationalist vocation was complemented by direct contacts and, above all, the awareness of being the local expression of an international revolutionary movement. The debate and conflict within the left will closely follow the trajectories of the international Marxist movement. The Marxist left was organized around two complementary and often contradictory political parties, the communists and the socialists. Both were product of popular politicization processes at the beginning of the century, which will be expressed in social mobilization and even revolutionary attempts in the 20s and early 30s. At the same time, both parties shaped their respective doctrines, practices, and political cultures from the reception of two key international events, the Russian Revolution and the Spanish Civil War. The first event was fundamental for the conversion of the former Socialist Workers' Party into the Communist Party, and the adoption of the Leninist model of organization. Its leader, Luis Emilio Recabarren, saw in the Soviet Union the fulfilled promise of a proletarian republic, like the one that should be built in Chile. Although this did not led him to an insurrectional strategy. On the other hand, the Spanish Civil War consolidated the anti-fascist identity of the Chilean left, uniting for some time socialists and communists in the popular front in the late 1930s. A common project aimed to deepen the democracy and expanding social rights. All this was complemented by local and regional events. The Socialist Party, for example, was a direct product of the brief Socialist Republic of 1932. In years of acute economic depression, the international connection of the Socialist Party was as diverse as the group that composed it. At first, the PS established relations with left-wing populist movements in Latin America, such as the Peruvian APRA. Many of its leaders went into exile in Santiago, deepening those networks. The Popular Front brought them closer to the communist world, although maintaining their criticism regarding the leading role of the Soviet Union. Within the PS, also, there were Trotskyist groups split off from the Communist Party in the previous years, some of whom had direct communication with Trotsky. At the same time, in the labor movement, some socialist leaders approached pro-Soviet continental organizations, such as the Confederation of Latin American Confederation of Latin American Workers. Once World War II and the socialist Bernardo Ibáñez decided to ally with the U.S. labor movement, which sought to counteract the communist influence in the region. This resulted in the division of the Chilean labor movement and the PS itself in the late 40s. The search for international reference, however, will not stop there. During the 50s, a group of important leaders became interested both in the Yugoslavian experience and the non-aligned movement. On the one hand, they praised this non-Soviet way of building socialism and its supposed concern for workers' participation in the economic system. On the other hand, the anti-colonial movement was viewed as a revolutionary path to national liberation, which at the same time offered a way to escape the East-West logic of the Cold War. The PC, on the other hand, assumed the Marxist-Leninist ideological tenets and the Soviet orthodoxy from its beginnings, which made possible the construction of a solid network with European and Latin American communists. They support the Soviet decisions on political strategy and foreign policy, tensioning in several opportunities the relation with the other groups in the left. And at the same time, the PC maintained a more or less stable strategic line aimed at inserting itself into the state's institution. This line was maintained even in the face of political exclusion and repression during the Gabriel González Videla government. In this year, in addition, the links with the Soviet involved the transfers of resources, scholarships, and the benefits of being the legitimate representative of a socialist world power. An important part of the appeal of the PC, both in popular sectors and among artists and intellectuals, was precisely the power of the socialist ideology represented simultaneously in the Soviet Union and the Communist Party. The failed and successful revolutions in Latin America during the 50s also redefined the parameters according to which the Marxist left understood the global reality. The overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954, for example, strongly accentuated the anti-imperialist character of both socialists and communists, not only as a product of the global confrontation with the USSR, but also as a consequence of aggressions and interventions in Latin America. The Cuban Revolution had a major effect, especially after its socialist and pro-Soviet turn at the beginning of the 60s. The Socialist Party complemented its links and analysis of non-Soviet socialist experiences with the Cuban case, assuming an important part of the strategic teachings. Especially after the electoral defeat of in 1964, the PS would propose an armed path for the construction of socialism, even though in practice it never stopped participating in the electoral system. The PC, on the other hand, will publicly defend Cuba, but without missing the opportunity to criticize the attempts to export the armed revolution to Latin America. This was because the PC had assumed the conclusion of the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1956, especially regarding the peaceful way. That notion, which admits the possibility of transiting to socialism without the need of an armed insurrection, justified the long trend of the PC to join the institutional political system and was the basis on which an alliance with the PS and above all with one of its main leaders, Salvador Allende, will be articulated. By the 60s, the flow of resources, contact with authorities, studies scholarships continued with the USSR, reaching important but immodest amounts in comparison with the magnitude that, of the US intervention in Chile. With the electoral triumph of the 1970, the left consolidate and expand its international networks. Allende became a world figure, awakening the sympathy of political and social movements around the world, many of which were not necessarily linked to the Soviet bloc. Santiago, the capital, also became a center for contacts and meetings between Latin American exiles and visitors from other latitudes, further expanding the influence of the left. The Cubans were especially insistent in strengthening relations with the Chilean through counseling and resources channeled through their embassy. The 1973 coup led to the exile of thousands of leftist leaders and sympathizers in Latin America and Europe. Many of them followed the path opened in the previous decades, especially those who sought to consolidate a revolutionary identity, the Soviet Union and Cuba. Others, however, were more receptive to the offering of West European countries in solidarity, among which Sweden stood out in the first years. State repression and the denunciation of murders and tortures carried out by the military aroused an enormous international repudiation. There are international organizations such as Amnesty International took the cause of Chile as one of the main objectives. Without identifying politically with the defeat popular unity, they deployed all their influence to identify and denounce state violence in Chile. In other words, the end of the popular unity and the dictatorship became an irresistible symbol for many Western and Eastern European societies. This had two dimensions. One, political solidarity, with the attempt to unite democracy and socialism on the part of socialist governments and political parties that formed the network of the Chilean left, and then two, a kind of immoral solidarity under the framework of human rights. The Latin American dictatorship, and in particular the Chilean one, were the basis of a paradigm shift in world politics with respect to the moral limit of governments towards their own population. Although human rights has a long history at that time, it was in this year that they became an effective weapon against authoritarianism on the part of transnational networks specifically oriented to these ends. The Chilean exiles were key in increasing the popularity of their cause. Many of them bore witness about the effects of political violence, especially to those who had been tortured by the military. Similarly, information on Chile's internal situation flowed through its contact channels. Other institutions, such as the Catholic Church, also collaborate in this, thanks to its ability to systematize this information and send it out, thus giving an empirical base to international campaigns against the dictatorship. Solidarity with Chile in Europe and elsewhere, in that sense, was not only the product of the feeling of indignation by some of its governments and part of its civil society, but also the consequence of the tireless work of the Chilean Marxist parties, even when for a strategic reason it was not advisable to make this connection explicit. It's in this sense that the networks of exiles of Marxist left with decades of direct or indirect experience with international political actors were successful. They were linked to national and international political context to denounce and isolate the regime. The dictatorship felt the blow. First, it reacted by trying to silence dissident voices abroad through its secret police. The murder of Orlando Letelier in the US in 1976 had a huge cost to the regime, showing the limits of that strategy. Then it tried to legitimize itself internally through a public consultation and then a new constitution, although that will not change the international situation. In addition, solidarity networks with Chile strongly impact the Marxist left. The communists decide to break their historical tradition and turn to an armed opposition, largely thanks to the Soviet support and the interpretation they made of the events in Chile. Part of the socialists, on the other hand, renounced to the idea of revolution by focusing their attention exclusively on the reconstruction of democracy. This renovation of part of the socialists was possibly mainly by its links with Western European political actors, a key source of support and resources. In the 1980s, many of the opposing NGOs, a relatively secure set of social organizations, given their non-evident connection with political parties, were funded by European institutions. This helped to rebuild both grassroots and intellectual movements, laying the foundation for post-authoritarian governments. In summary, the integration of the Chilean Marxist left into transnational networks and the circulation of people, resources, and ideas between Chile and Europe in the 20th century were key to its political identity. All this resulted in a successful international integration once the dictatorship sought to eliminate them from the Chilean political landscape. In that sense, it strongly impacted the course followed by Chilean political actors and their capacity to arouse the necessary support aimed to reorganize the political and social opposition that will eventually lead to democratic restoration. That's it.